What's up, everyone? My name is Jeff, and we're so excited you're here with us today. Here's a couple upcoming events around the church you might want to know about. If you drove to church and parked your car in the lot, got a cup of coffee, or walked your child into one of our children's ministries, you've already experienced some of our amazing volunteers. Getting involved on a volunteer team is one of the best ways to make Port City feel like home. We're always excited to offer opportunities for people to get plugged in and begin serving in a role they love, whether that's on a Sunday or another time during the week. If you're interested in learning more ways you can become a volunteer, swing by What's Next.
Hey Wilmington, my name is Bianca Olthoff, and I'm so excited to be back at Port City's Community Church March 1st and 2nd for their Women's Conference. If you've never been to a women's conference, this is a great place to dive in. We're going to be going through my favorite book of the Bible, the Book of Ruth. So bring your friends, invite your enemies or your frenemies. Those are the people that are kind of your friends and kind of your enemies because they need Jesus too. Join us, sign up. I can't wait to see you. March 1st and 2nd.
Ladies, it's not too late to register for the two-day women's conference coming up March 1st and 2nd. Bianca Olthoff will be sharing 2 days of inspiration where you're sure to have fun and build some authentic community. You can register online at portcitychurch.org/women. Thanks for being with us today. We are so excited to share our Sunday with you.
Welcome, Port City Community Church. How you guys doing this evening? My name's Jeff, and I'm so excited to be here with you guys today. If it is your first time, welcome. We're so happy you chose to spend your Sunday with us. And we're up here for a really cool reason this evening, actually.
We are. We're really excited. Did you introduce yourself?
I did, yeah.
You did?
Jeff.
I'm sorry.
And plus, they already saw me in the video.
They did.
How many times do I have to introduce myself here?
This is way too much, Jeff Banks. Hey, my name is Brett, and we work in the student ministries here, and we do have a fun announcement today. We want you guys to know the dates of Fuse. Fuse is our summer camp. Woohoo! It is. We are in year 11 of camp, running our own camp. Yeah, and so we have multiple dates to give you because we're doing something brand new this year. We're not going to give you just 1 week of dates. We're giving you 2 weeks because we love Fuse so much. We wanted to do it twice.
Exactly. It just gives us so much energy. It's so much fun.
It's not exhausting at all.
Just kidding. The reason why we're doing Fuse twice is actually a really, really cool reason. We're doing 2 separate expressions of Fuse, one for high school and one for middle school. And we've just realized that high schoolers and middle schoolers are in such different places mentally and spiritually and emotionally and all these things. And we want to really be able to tailor those environments to where they're at. So it's a really, really awesome reason that we're doing it. So the high school one, the dates for that are July 20th through 24th. So if you're a high school parent, make sure you mark that down, July 20th through 24th. And middle school is?
Yeah, middle school is the 12th through the 16th of July. So if your student is currently in 6th through 8th grade, they'll attend our middle school Fuse, like I said, July 12th through 16th. And we're doing it in a new location. The last couple of years, we've been driving for like 11 plus hours to Tennessee.
It was horrible.
It was terrible. I've lost many years of my life on that trip back and forth. We are going to be just outside of Charlotte this year at a camp called Crowder's Ridge. It's on Crowder's Mountain near Gastonia. So
it's more of a hill. Yeah. It's not really a mountain.
It's a ridge. But we're going to be close by, which is awesome. So like a 4-hour ride. So saving many, many years on my life.
I know.
And so we, for the first time ever in the history of summer camps, are not increasing the price this year. We're actually lowering it. The price is going down to $385. So we're under $400 for the first time in many years. So we're really, really excited about all the changes that are coming for Fuse this year. Want to make sure you knew what those dates were so you can mark your calendars. Registration will be opening in the next couple of weeks, and we're so excited about it.
Awesome. So Mike is going to be here with us today. We're starting a new series called Church is Now.
They know that. They're here. It's
right.
a 5 o'clock service.
But you know what I mean.
Church is Now.
The name of the series is Church is Now.
Yeah.
So we're excited about that. But before Mike comes out, we want to spend some time in worship with you guys. So stand up, say hey to someone next to you, and the band will start in a second.
Good afternoon. My name is Kaylee. This is Brian, and these are my friends up here, and we are just really excited for tonight. one of the things that we value so much, and that is that every Sunday and every moment or every song that we sing, it's so much deeper. That it's not just to fill the space, but there's so much deeper behind it, and it's to make God known in everything that we do and everything that we say and everything that we sing. And one of my favorite things about worship is that we declare truth out loud. We speak it, we sing it. And I think this is so important because if you think about it, the next 15 to 20 minutes that you hear with us, we are literally declaring truth. That's all we're doing, we're declaring truth. And then the next 30 minutes after that, Mike will come out and he's gonna speak truth, and we're gonna be listening to the truth. And so for the whole hour that you are here with us, you are literally wrapped in truth. And this is something that I need, and maybe it's something that you need, because it's so easy in whatever environment that you are in, it's so easy for us to get distracted. And it's easy for us to not let truth be the highlight reel of our day, maybe even in our thoughts as well. And in His Word, it says that His truth will set us free. And that's what we hope for tonight. As you are declaring truth, that you would be set free from whatever you're holding on to tonight. So we're gonna sing a chorus before we continue on. And my prayer, my hope is, if you just need to listen to this chorus before we begin, I encourage you to do that. But what we're about to sing in this chorus is really the foundation of why we sing and why we worship. So let this be just your anthem tonight. Our chains are gone, our debt is paid, the cross has overthrown the grave. For Jesus' blood that sets us free means death
You understand me. You understand me. And come to me in the valley of unknowns. You understand me. You understand me. You understand me, God. You understand me. So I throw all my cares before you. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought you were. Oh God, oh you're oh you're I believe, but help my unbelief. You understand me. You understand me. And help me reach the faith that's underneath. You understand me. Oh, you do. You understand me. You understand me, God. You understand me. Oh, I throw all my cares before you, 'cause my doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought you in the Father's hands. Leave the rest in the Father's hands. I will rest in the Father's hands. Leave the rest in the Father's hands. I will rest in the Father's hands. Leave the rest in the Father's hands. I will rest in the Father's hands. And leave the rest in the In the Father's hands I will rest. I will rest in the Father's hands and leave the rest in the Father's hands. So I throw all my cares before you. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you. Yeah, you're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you. Yeah, you're bigger than I thought you were.
And let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song. And you are good as he is good. God, we believe you are a God who is working. For those that have a hard time to say, God, that you are good, I pray, God, that they would say and they would know that you are still working. You are working in the waiting. You are working. I thank you that it is in your nature that you never leave us. I thank you that you are by our side. In the valley of unknowns, God, you are still with us. And because of that, we can say, God, thank you. You are good. God, I thank you for this time of worship that we can just declare truth, to let us soak in the truth of who you are and your character and your nature. So God, I pray that we would continue to open our ears and our eyes to know more of you, and that we would hold on to the truth. And we love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you guys so much for worshiping with us. You may have a seat. And as you do, I invite the host team to come down and receive the offering.
I picked up a bat and a ball when I was like 5 years old, and then middle school was 3 sports: volleyball, basketball, softball, and I made the decision to cut out everything else and just focus on softball. I walked on as a freshman here at UNCW, and now I'm a senior. I was a part of an FCA travel ball club. They would host like a small group gathering with multiple teams inside the park, and those coaches inspired me to pour into the team that I'm in while we're here at UNCW. So we just thought, why not do a community group ourselves? Since we were already meeting during the spring in the hotel, why not meet all year round and just pour into each other that way? The presence of God was not meant to be contained into 4 walls. It was meant to be like the ground that I walk on. It's the solid ground, and no matter where I go, that the presence of God should be there too. And so it doesn't matter, like student athlete, in the workforce, whatever, in the family, whatever your role is, you should be the church wherever you are.
Good afternoon. It's great to see all of you. I love what Laurel said. It's something very important. A lot of things are very important, but she said that no matter what your role is, you represent like the church. That's where the church exists. I grew up in a culture, and perhaps if you grew up in the church, maybe you grew up this, if you're close to my age, where it was always about, this call to full-time ministry. And what I've been telling people is, and really what my youth pastor told me was, until you should never work at the church until you can't do anything else, oddly enough. And the reason is because the ministry actually exists out where you are, on the front lines, in the workplace, in the schools, in the classrooms, out where we get to live our lives. That's exactly the way it's intended to be. And part of the inspiration for this series occurred after the hurricane. And just so you'll know, I'll go ahead and give a disclaimer. I feel better than I sound. but I will be quick on my microphone in case I have to do something gross up here. I've got hot tea, chamomile tea, and Kleenexes and other stuff. But so good and so helpful. But this was inspired a lot from what we experienced back in September when Hurricane Florence came through. Obviously, I think many of us remember that really well. And there were a couple things that happened, at least for me. It was really probably one of the more terrifying moments in my life, and also one of the most hopeful. As we kind of endured and watched things unfold in the first few days, immediately, even as it was still raining, and watching the church kind of be mobilized into the community. It wasn't just about going and providing disaster relief, whether it was chainsaws or debris removal or food and water, things like that, but it was really just the carriers of hope that we became in those moments, the people who had lost everything. You could just kind of see this rapid response, this movement of God's people from all over into, and just kind of gave me this picture. People would ask us because of the damage and all the schedules being disrupted. They would say, "Hey, Mike, are you guys having church on Sunday?" And my response was always, "Oh, we're having church every day. We're going to have services on Sunday." It began to get this picture, this way of thinking about things. We have church every day, and we gather for different reasons. Last week, I thought Clay did a fantastic job helping us talk about, helping us understand and think about the way we gather on Jesus. I assumed y'all enjoyed Clay last week. Yep, me too. I thank you very much. I was so grateful. And he gave me a couple of things to think about. I did not watch him on Sunday. I was actually in Animal Kingdom on Sunday. But I did watch him on Monday. And he talked about gathering, these things that we gather around when he comes together as Jesus. And then that as we advance, we go out in with this mission, with this sense of purpose that he's assigned to each of us. And I want to explore that and really encourage and even challenge you in that over these next few weeks that we have together. Over the last few weeks, we've talked about, and we've been talking about this for a couple years at our church, two really significant concepts. We spent the last 6 weeks in a series called Forged. We were talking about our identity. Y'all see the T right there? Identity, right? You just did a series called Forged. Remember this? That was a long time ago. We just finished it? Okay. Forged on identity. We talked about this? Okay. So we just finished a series on identity. And we've been talking about these two concepts over the last few years, this idea of identity and this idea of culture. Identity is who we are. Culture is what we do. Culture isn't just the things that culture is the way that Erwin McManus describes it like this. He said, culture is the spontaneous recurring patterns. The things that you do without thinking, the things that come naturally to you because of who you are, because of your identity. Identity and culture. We've been reading a book, a couple of us together, by a guy. I'm not really sure what his faith journey exactly is. He writes mostly or pretty much exclusively to a secular market. He's known in the marketing world. He's written several books. This newest one is called This Is Marketing. He's written a book called Tribes. He's written another book. It's probably one of his first famous books is The Purple Cow. His name is Seth Godin. And there he coins this simple phrase. And we've been using this to talk about the movement of the church. And the phrase is, people like us do things like this. People like us do things like this. People like us do things like this. People like us, Tar Heel fans, do things like this. They act a certain way, don't they? Especially when they win. And so, people like us, we are Mac people or Apple people. People like us do things like this. We don't let you in our group text because you turn our text green, right? People like us do things like this. There are these patterns that happen because of who we are. And you put yourself in whatever group you put yourself in. If you're in whatever group you identify, whatever fam, whatever profession, people like us do things like this. And we've been talking about this over the last few weeks, that people like us are people whose identity is that as a child of the Father who has been redeemed in that relationship by the sacrifice of his Son, that Jesus came to make a way for us to be redeemed to the Father. People like us do things like this. We've got to start to understand and think about what that is and how this works together, because that's really where the ministry, that's really where the impact is going to happen. One of the things to me that I feel so privileged in terms of being a part of Port City is we've been here almost 20 years, and Port City has a really good reputation in our city and in our region. And that's due to a lot of reasons, a lot of grace, a lot of great people, a lot of reasons for that. But that's not just a privilege that we sort of share, that's a responsibility that we have in that as well. And so what I want to talk to us about over the next few days is how it is that we leverage this. And I've had this conversation with so many people over the last few years, seeing how God is using people in our church, like Laurel, and I could give you name after name after name, who are doing this, who are seeing themselves as the church, instead of just waiting and saying, hey, where are we going to invite someone to this series or this teaching or this program? We start to realize that the church is actually right where I am. The church is now everywhere that I go. And I want you to hear what Jesus has actually said to us, to me, and to you in this. A couple of assumptions as we begin I want to point out, because when we talk about this, immediately people start thinking about how do we win our friends and neighbors. I'm just talking about winning people, but I'm going to use that language. But people are not sort of won over. They're not compelled simply by logic. Logic's important, but that's not how you win the heart of someone. We're not won by logic. We're won by love. This is exactly what God has come to do. Now listen, I know a lot of us spend a lot of time analyzing things and talking about things and thinking about things, and trying to make sure that there's a logical sense to what we're doing. We put the Bible under a microscope. We try to understand its validity and all those things. Those are all important things. But ultimately, whenever you're talking about any issue that really matters, you're not going to win someone by logic, by an argument. You're not going to argue them into anything. It's going to be when their hearts are transformed, their hearts are connected in one by the thing that we all need as human beings, which is love. And the second thing is the problem is not our intellect. The problem is not our thinking, although there's a great case that can possibly be made for that. The problem is pride. Our problem isn't intellect, it's pride. The way I say this is that people aren't dumb. People aren't dumb, people are proud, and proud people do dumb things. That's how it kind of works. People aren't dumb. Now some of you are going, well, I don't know, Mike, I know a lot of people, and there's some people that are dumb. People aren't dumb. They're just proud, and that's all of us. We're all prone to this. We're all subject to this. We all fall prey to this. And most of the times, if you think about this happens with our kids, it happens with our spouses, it happens with almost anybody on any side of any issue. What happens to us is we start getting into a war of words or a war of ideas, and it quickly becomes about defending a position. And as soon as you start defending a position, you will stop pursuing the truth. And this is true in almost any setting. Go watch the news, you'll see this happen all the time. There's no instance or no real quest to pursue the truth once we start defending our position. What we are concerned about is making sure that the words that we use are designed to trap the other person, to prove our point, to keep things moving, to hide and conceal the truth, if anything, and not pursue it. And we've been invited into a different way of thinking. So you think about this, what Jesus came to do is he came to give us life. It's what every human being wants. Jesus came to give us life. He came to set us free, all the things that he says about himself. And what I always wonder is, why is this message so difficult? Why is it that it's so hard for people to come to Jesus? I mean, you think this would be easy. You think this would be a no-brainer. We've been talking about this for a while, and I've shared this a few years ago, and I want to share it with you again. And when we start to think about this, these are sort of these circles of prevention, things that keep people from coming to Jesus. Now, what I would do is I would say, if you put Jesus in the center, it says, how is it that we get to him? What I would say is I would put this little thin skin around the core of Jesus. We'll call these are the things that are essential to who he is. In other words, if you take these things away from him, he no longer is who he says he is. In other words, you can't just say, well, I'm coming to Jesus because I think he's a good moral teacher. Or I think he's a good teacher. I think he was clever and he gave a lot of clever axioms, a lot of wisdom. So Jesus is sort of a good model for human instruction. That's not who he says he is or was. That's not what he says about himself. That's not what anybody thinks about him. So if you sort of take that away, you don't really have Jesus anymore. You have something else. You just have a source of wisdom, another book in the line of a lot of books that will give you some clever ideas about how to live. That's not who Jesus was. The things that are essential about him would include his deity, that he is God, that the fullness of God was given to him to dwell within Jesus Christ. He is the full image and radiance of God himself, of the Father. He is God himself. I think his authority for salvation, his birth, his death, his resurrection are all things that are part of this core, these essential things. If you take any of those things away, you lose the essence of who Jesus really is. He has the authority of salvation, the authority of life in this world. He's the creator. John 1, right? The Word was, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and he was with God in the beginning, and not anything that was made apart from him. So there's this piece we have to understand. This is the essential part of who he is. And there's not a lot of them. But there are a few of them that are absolutely important. If you take those away from him, you no longer have who he says that he was. As we're going to put those together as essentials, those are the things that the church has believed and held fast and what Jesus said about himself since the beginning of the church. Then out here you have what we will call doctrines. Now, because I read my Bible, I understand that it talks about the importance of sound doctrines. Doctrines are important. They're very important. We have doctrines that we believe and uphold here in our church. Doctrines are things that churches have used to define or delineate themselves from other churches. Right? I grew up Southern Baptist. We thought that we were the ones that were going to heaven because John the Baptist is in the Bible and he was the first Baptist. And after all, our name is in the Bible and that's kind of makes it work. So we build all these denominations on it. People ask me, say, Mike, do you believe in infant baptism? I'm like, of course I believe in infant baptism. It's a real thing. It happens. You can't not believe in it. You can have opinions about it. You can have doctrinal positions on it. People have asked me who have grown up, they were sprinkled when they were kids. They say, Mike, does my baptism count? Like, of course it counts. Right? How do you discount something that someone did for you when you were a child, right? They're doctrines. There's just ways that we think about these things, and some of them are more important than others, and they've been used to cause lots of church splits in the history of the church, but they're doctrines. Then out here you have, these are opinions. These are opinions that everybody has about everything, and you know what people say about opinions, right? Everybody's got one. And then out here on this last circle, you know, dot this in. Out here is what you might have. These are perceptions. These are the things that we perceive about people like us. And every segment along this little journey toward Jesus are things that threaten to keep people away from him. People ask me questions all the time, serious questions. I'm like, you're a follower of Christ, right? Yes, I'm a follower of Christ. You consider yourself a Christian? Yes, I consider myself a Christian. Mike, how in the world can you be a follower of Jesus and root for Duke? Like it is this, like, how can you root for a devil? Like, how can you follow Jesus? There's perceptions that people have that just can't get by. And I'll tell you, when we start doing this, there are a lot of things. People who come to Christ, who come into the church, or they read something or watch something, they go, oh my gosh, if I become a Christian, do I have to become a Republican, or do I have to become a Democrat, or do I have to be this, or do I have to be that? There's all these perceptions that people have about what is expected of you once you sort of move into this place. In fact, what the most tempting thing to do is to create a way to the way. Because whenever you start arguing with someone, whenever someone comes and says, well, I think Christians are like this, and you say, oh, they're not, you start arguing at these points out here. And in fact, one of the things that the church has done is says, let's create a way to get to the way, and we'll make you believe all of our opinions and all of our doctrines until we all get in here. And then once you get all these check boxes checked, then we can get you to Jesus. And I'll tell you, that's actually very tempting. Do you know why? Because if everybody believes like you, thinks like you, looks like you, acts like you, things are a whole lot easier to deal with. Did you know that? That's just not how the world works. As much as I want it to work that way, as much as you want it to work that way, it's not how it works. And what we've decided at Port City Church, what I've decided, this has been a long, grueling wrestling match with God in a lot of ways. I'm thankful for a lot of voices in my life that have helped me. What we've decided is that we're not going to put any barriers between anybody and Jesus. We're going to try to get people to Jesus. And you know why? Because we believe that when you enter into a relationship with Jesus, an authentic, real, dependent relationship with Jesus, he will be and have authority over every doctrine and opinion and perception that you have. If you can get people to Jesus, the issues will take care of themselves. Most of us have not learned how to live in that kind of relationship with him, including myself. And what we wind up doing is we wind up doing a lot of things. We wind up putting a lot of unnecessary things in front of people. We sort of create these groups of people that keep people out rather than actually take the message out in the world the way we've been designed to do. I want to show you what Jesus said about this and really kind of push on us for just a minute. About the two things I wrote down here on my notes, just so you'll know that we're going to spend the rest of the time in Matthew 16, is that God created, when he came to redeem man, he created a way, not a curriculum. And that way centers on a relationship, not some logical understanding. We'll look at that in just a minute. And the second thing is the church is not a place, it's a way. When people talked about Jesus and the movement in the first century, they called them followers of the way. The word church came about through a translation problem that was much later on that became this place or this hub where people would assemble. But the actual word church is simply the word assembly, which means a gathering of people or a movement of people. It's a congregation. It's an assembly of people with a purpose. It's this movement outward into the world. That's how it would have been thought of. And so this passage happens as Jesus is talking about three important things. He's talking about bread, he's talking about teaching, and he's talking about the kingdom. And this is all in Matthew 15 and 16. If you know what's happening, Matthew is written, Clay mentioned last week, by the tax collector named Matthew, who is a follower of Jesus. So he's writing this firsthand account. Matthew was a Jewish person who would have been really in bad standing with the Jewish people because he was a tax collector, which means he was a friend of Rome. And he wrote a lot of his gospel targeted to help Jewish people understand the message of the Messiah. That was his angle. If you read his gospel, that was his angle, is helping the Jewish people understand the message of the Messiah. He included a lot of the miracles in there, a lot of the teachings in there. And one of the things that you see is the miracles. Jesus fed 4,000 people at one time. He fed 5,000 people at one time. You've probably heard this, the young boy with the fish and the loaves. And they feed all these people and they collect baskets full of leftovers at the end of this. And Jesus was always using analogies, parables and analogies of things. And one particular time after he's fed the 4,000 people, he gets the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the religious leaders of the day, they come to him and they're asking him questions about some sign from heaven. They said, Jesus, show us a sign. And basically Jesus says, you're not getting a sign except for the sign of Jonah, which that's a whole other talk there. And they're like, the sign of Jonah, that makes no sense. And then the disciples and Jesus get into the boat and they cross over the lake. And here's a memory verse for you. Memory verse, Matthew 16, verse 5. When they got across the lake, the disciples forgot to take bread. You should memorize that verse, right? It's like important. When the disciples got in the boat, they forgot to take bread. So they get to the other side and Jesus is talking to them and he says, beware of the leaven of the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And they're going, is Jesus talking about leaven because we forgot to bring the bread? That was kind of that's their whole thing. Did he, like, you can see this happening. Jesus starts talking about bread. They're like, we forgot the bread. Oh my gosh, he's like doing this passive aggressive thing to help us remember that we forgot the bread. We should have brought the bread. He's like, no. And then he says this, he says, do you not know how many baskets were taken up after I fed 5,000? How many baskets were taken up after I fed 4,000? This is kind of the way Jesus was speaking to his disciples. He says, I want you to be careful of the teachings of the Sadducees and the Pharisees. I want you to be careful of the teaching. The teaching wasn't just the logical instruction that was given. It was the way of life and the authority in that way of life in which or of which people lived. It was the way of life and the authority under which people live. That's what he's talking about. So you sort of got this picture. This is what he's talking about. And then he takes them up a little further north, outside the water, outside the lake area. And he takes them up into a place called Caesarea Philippi. And this is in verse 13. And Jesus asks them a question. Who do people say that I am? What's the word on the street? There's a lot of buzz about me. What are people saying? And the disciples came up with some answers, and I don't know if that was just kind of popcorn. They said, some say you're John the Baptist, and some say you're Elijah, and some say you're Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. There's a lot of speculation about who this person is. And then Jesus stops and he says, but who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? He's sitting with these 12. He's like, who do you, each of you, who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter, who's probably the most brash of all the disciples, he's the one who cut off the guy's ear in the garden. He's the one who got out of the boat and walked on water. So he was usually kind of the first one to open his mouth or to do something. Simon Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And everybody's heard this passage. You've heard it, this is this big declaration. You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then Jesus says this, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. He calls him by his formal name. Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. For this, and I want you to listen to this, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father who's in heaven. This confession, this sense, this understanding wasn't an intellectual pursuit. It was revealed to you, it was given to you, it came to you by my Father. It's really important for you to sort of get that picture in your head. Jesus points this out. And then this is what Jesus says to him. We'll put this up on the screen, Matthew 16, verse 18. And I tell you, he says, you're Simon, son of Jonah, and now he calls him Peter or Petrus, which is rock. He says, and I tell you that you are the rock. And Peter says, can you smell what the rock is cooking, or whatever he says. And on this rock, I will build my church. I'm now going to call you Petros, and on this Petros, which interestingly enough, there's a lot of source issues or source metaphors in what Jesus calls him. It's the source of where water came from, where springs came from, where life, it's this foundational place where the water came from the rock. That's how a Jewish person would understand this. On this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Now, the word church there isn't a building. The word church there isn't a denominational assembly of people who come together who believe certain things. The word church there is, I will build this movement of people. I will begin to make a people like us on this confession, that you are the Christ, you are who you say that you are. I will put, that's going to be the foundation of this movement. And he goes on, he says that I will build my church on this, and the gates of Hades shall not overcome this. So most of us, especially if you grew up in the church, you think of it like this, that there's the gates of heaven over there, and there's the gates of Hades over here. And what Jesus was saying is, if you believe in me, you won't go there, you'll go there. That's how most of us have perceived this. That's how the gospel's been presented to you. It's like, do you want to go to heaven or do you want to go to hell? Is that really a hard choice for human beings to make? Not for me. It's like, do you want to drive a Corvette or do you want to drive a Chevette? Like, take your pick. That's not what Jesus is saying at all. He says, upon this rock, there's going to be this movement that emerges. Upon this confession of who I am, there's going to be a people like us that moves out into the world, and the gates of Hades shall not overcome them. It's not talking about, it's interesting enough, he took them to Caesarea Philippi, which is actually where there would be an old Greek temple there on this place called Pan, which is where this temple was built in honor of the god of the underworld, Hades. And there was actually these gates that were there at this temple called the gates of Hades. So he might have taken them to Caesarea Philippi to point this out. Upon this rock, I'm going to build my church. And this whole way of thinking, this whole authoritative system will not stand a chance against this movement that I'm going to begin. You begin to see there's a whole different picture, something that's moving, something that's happening. And then he goes on, he says this, look at this. This kind of clears it right up for you. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Remember, he's talking specifically to Simon Peter. If you grew up in some traditions, you've talked about St. Peter being like kind of the guy who stands, you've probably all heard a joke of Peter standing at the gates of heaven, and he asks you some question. You have to answer the question right, and if you answer the question right, you get in. If you don't get in right. You've all heard a joke. This is where it comes from, because he says, hey, Peter, I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom. You're going to stand at the gate, and you're going to ask questions of people when they come in. That's not what it says at all. That's the picture we've got in our head. He says there's going to be this movement of people, and here's what he says. I'm going to hand you the keys to the kingdom. I'm handing you the keys to the kingdom. You got a picture in your head of what that looks like. He's handing you the keys, and then he says this. And whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. That cleared it right up, didn't it? Like, you understand exactly what he's talking about. So you got to do a little digging. And what you'll see if you're reading your Bible, and if you're reading it closely, you'll notice that you'll have usually like a little footnote, and where mine says, whatever you bound on earth will be bound in heaven, I have a little C there. And whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. I have a little C there as well. And you look down in the notes and you see there's a change in tense, that there's a lot of scholars who think this might be mentioned in the original language a little bit differently. It might read something like this. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will have already been bound in heaven. And whatever you loose on earth will already have been loosed in heaven. This is actually the very same language that Jesus would use in one of his famous prayers that he taught us to pray. When you pray, pray like this. Our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be thy name. What's next? Thy kingdom come. What's next? Thy will be done. How? On earth as it is in heaven. Here as it is there. Whatever you bind here will have already been bound in heaven. Whatever you loose here will have already been loosened in heaven. When we were 16, I know you're 16 now, you get your own car, right? That's kind of a way of life now. If you're 16, you get your own car. When we were 16, that wasn't so. When you were 16, if you were lucky, you got to drive your parents' car. If you were really lucky, your parents drove something other than a 1986 Toyota minivan, which weren't Siennas back in the day. They were moonmobiles. They like they belonged on Mars. But your dad would come to you and he would hand you the keys. He would say, here are the keys to the car. Here are the keys. You know what that meant? That meant you were given the authority and the responsibility to take everything that he had taught you in those months leading up to you being freed. As he had said, here are the keys. Now, whatever has been bound in our instruction earlier is now going to be bound and held to in your application of it, in your driving. And whatever has been loose, whatever was permitted for you is now going to be permitted for you again. He gave you the keys. He says, you have the keys to the car. You are free to drive, but you are free to drive under the authority and the responsibility that I have given you. Do you see what he's saying? He said, there's a confession we've made. When we come to Christ as he is, he hands us the keys to the kingdom. And he says, you are free to live out the responsibility and the authority that I have given you. That's the picture that we have here. And what's really interesting about this, because it just talks a lot about we've been entrusted with his message, with his kingdom, with his image, with his love, all these things we've been entrusted with. He's handed you and I the keys. He says, this is your responsibility. This is a new way of thinking. This isn't a way to comply with all the old things. When we talk about what is it that Jesus bound and loosed, did you hear how Jesus dealt with the law just a few chapters earlier? When Jesus was teaching, they would come and say, hey, Jesus, tell us about the commands, right? You've heard it said, right, an eye for an eye. We like an eye for an eye. And Jesus says, okay, you've heard it said an eye for an eye, but what I tell you, if someone smacks you on the right cheek, turn and offer them your left cheek. You've heard it said an eye for an eye, that whatever someone does to you, you get the authority to do back to them. But what I'm telling you, in the way of Jesus, in my way, if someone hits you on one cheek, you offer them your left. I've heard some Christians say, that's why I only get 2 strikes, because if you hit me a third time, I only got 2 cheeks, a third time you're getting hit back. That is not what Jesus is talking about. When they talked about murder, he says, you've heard it say, thou shalt not commit murder. Yeah, he says, do you realize that what I say to you, in the way of Jesus, if you harbor anger in your heart to another human being, you've already murdered them. You've already disregarded them. You've already treated them with contempt. You've heard, thou shalt not commit adultery. Do you know what I say? You know what the way of Jesus says? The way of Jesus says, if you've looked at a woman with lust in your heart, you've already committed adultery with her. That's what Jesus was saying. He says, well, I'm binding and loosing in a different way than anybody else has. I've given you the authority to live in the way of Jesus, to live in the way that I have established for you, the way I've empowered you and invited you to live. And I've given you the keys to live with that kind of authority and that kind of responsibility. What I really press you on the last few minutes we have together, because a lot of people, they come to me and they'll say, like, I want to talk to you about something. They always have all these facts about things that they're talking about. Let me tell you why I don't like this, or why I don't agree with this, or why I think this is wrong, or why I think we could, skirt around this thing that Jesus said. And what they're usually trying to do is they're usually trying to talk about something out here that keeps them or prevents them, or some loophole for not doing what Jesus would actually command us to do. And the reality is, most of the time when I talk to people and you start arguing, if you push, and I don't argue, when they start arguing with me, if you push just enough, what you'll find is most people already know. I can't tell you when I've talked to people, they're trying to convince me of something, and they already know in their heart of hearts that something is whispering, something is missing, something is working in there. Now, this is exactly the way the Old Testament talks about the new covenant, the new way of Jesus. Jeremiah wrote this. He said, there's a day that is coming when the law won't be on stones. It won't be a bunch of commands that you can find loopholes to and get around and figure out how to use it to get your way and to keep other people out of your way. But there's a day that's coming when the law will be written on your hearts. The law will be written on your hearts. And it will be something that happens on the inside of you. Flesh and blood did not reveal this to you. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've been trying to intellectually rationalize all the things that you're thinking and doing and all the things that are keeping you from being the kind of person that you know, that you want to be, that you long to be, that you were made to be. And there's something on the inside that is whispering. That's the promise and the hope of the new covenant. The law is written on our hearts. In fact, this is exactly how Paul talks about this in the book of Romans. And I'm so thankful to Bruxy Cavey for really talking about this as directly as he has in Romans chapter 10. In Romans chapter 10, they're basically talking about this idea of the law and how we use the law to keep ourselves out of trouble. And Paul says that's the opposite. The law actually condemns you. And then he says this, for it is, in verse 8, but what does this old way say? The word is near you. It is in your mouth and it is in your heart. For some of you, you're sitting here and you've been wrestling with God for a long time, trying to convince yourself that you don't really believe, or here's why you shouldn't believe, or here's why you're not obligated to this or to that. But you know deep down inside of you that something's been pulling at you for a long time. And he says, the word is in you, the word is near you. And this is the message of faith that we are proclaiming to you. That whisper, that sense inside of you, that's the call. That's the message of faith that is drawing you, that is calling you. And here's what he says. If we declare with our mouths that Jesus is Lord, and we believe in our heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. If we confess with our mouths, not that Jesus is a good dude, or not that Jesus has some good ways, and not that Jesus would make the world a better place, that we confess that Jesus is Lord. If we give him the kind of authority in our lives that he intends and is actually designed to have, it will change the way we see and view everything else. There have been things in my life, ways in which I would not normally act, in which I would say, this is how I would do it. But I've had to learn to say, God, if I'm going to follow in your way, if I'm going to live as though you've handed me the keys to bring your kingdom to bear, I have to allow you to have the authority in my life, which means overstepping the things that I would do, things that I can even justify according to the things that you've written. There are lots of things that I can do, and I can justify them because I know this book relatively well. But as I'm coming to learn the way of Jesus, I'm realizing that what he's intended for us isn't to create loopholes and ways we can keep our way, safe and sanitary and away from everything. He's actually called us. He's created a movement that the gates of hell cannot overpower. He's created a way for which the forces of evil in this world cannot touch. I don't know about you, but that gives me a tremendous amount of hope. People ask me all the time about the condition of the world. Mike, does it bother you about the politics and this? I'm like, no, it's just a tremendous opportunity for the church to be the church. But it's not going to be the church because we set up our walls and we have services 3 times on Sunday or wherever else we have them. It's going to happen because you and I begin to understand that we've been handed the keys to the kingdom. You've been handed the keys to the kingdom. He says, this is the movement, and you have the freedom to live with the authority and the responsibility that comes with professing him as your king. So my question to you is, how are you doing with that? Right? What I don't want to do, and I want you to hear me very carefully, I'm not trying to get you to doubt or question your salvation. That's not what I'm trying to get you to do. If you've been walking with the Lord for a long time, what I do want you to do is I want you to ask this with a sense of freshness. The same question that Jesus asked his disciples, I want to ask to you, who is it that you say that he is? Because you walk with Jesus for a long time and he becomes kind of really like a friend and someone that you can kind of take his word or not take his word, and you kind of, you get real comfortable with him and his ways. It's been a long time since he's really challenged or usurped your own authority in your life. And so it's really good with a sense of freshness to stop and say, Jesus, I'm going to set you up and I'm going to say, you're the king, you're my king. And you're the one who has authority. How is it that you are calling me to live? And you go back and you start to immerse yourself in what it is that Jesus said and what he did and how he taught and how he loved. And you begin to look and understand and try to see, God, what are you saying to me? These things are not revealed to you by intellect. They reveal to you when you posture yourself and say, Father, will you speak to me, speak to my heart deep down in here. We live and honor him as our Lord in every single thing that we are doing. If you get people to Jesus, the issues will take care of themselves. I really believe that. We spend so much time trying to tackle each other at the source of the issues, when if we can just get people to Jesus, I think it honestly changes everything. That's what we're trying to do. You realize that was the intention. When Jesus said this, what he said is, when people encounter people like us, they're encountering me. When people encounter our church, it's not because they come in these doors. They encounter our church because they encounter you. He's handed you the keys to the kingdom. So who is it that you say that he is? For some of you, if you're like me, maybe it's been a while since you've really contemplated that or thought about it, I would spend the week on that. Others of you are here and you're not really sure what you believe, and I want to ask you the same question. Who do you say that Jesus is? Some of you are like, man, I like some of the stuff he says. I like the fact that he's kind of hippie like me, or whatever it is that you would kind of ascribe to him. That's not who he is. That's not what he came to do. He came to be Lord. At the very end, it says that at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow on the earth and under the earth, and every tongue shall confess that he is Lord. And as we sort of start to process this for who God is calling us to be as a church, it's really important that we wrestle with that question. There are 2 things I think God has assigned to us when he handed us the keys, and they're really simple. Number 1 is that you and I are designed to bear the integrity of his image. We represent the way of Jesus to the world around us. In your home, in your classroom, at your workplace, on the athletic field, can you imagine that? On the road, in the store, in line, at Disney World, all the places. We bear the integrity of his image. That's one of the things he said when he handed us the keys. And number two is we steward the authority, the influence of his love. You know what? It's so funny if you think about this. Human beings are dying to be loved. And we spend all of our time trying to convince them with our clever arguments, our carefully chosen words and points and tweets, when really we have been given the most powerful, transformative force ever known to human beings. And it's exactly why Jesus commanded us the way he did. They will know that you are people like us when you do things like this. And he said the thing like this is that we will learn to love like Jesus did. People like us do things like him. And it starts when you and I really begin to think and really get serious about who it is that you and I say that he is. Let's pray together. Father, as we sort of start this, we have been invited into a church, a movement, an assembly, a gathering that by design moves outward and into a culture. Father, we have a force. We are your body, your hands, your feet. We are your heart. We reflect who it is that you are in everything that we do. And I ask that we would start this process just with a sense of freshness by acknowledging you as our King and declaring you as our Lord. Father, you have taken all that authority and you have granted it to us, handed us the keys to live within the freedom of the responsibility and the authority that you have given to us. And I ask, Father, that you would guide us and empower us in every step. Flesh and blood doesn't help us figure this out, but it is the power of your Holy Spirit revealing and calling and forming us as we become the church, the people like us that do things like you. Father, may when people see and encounter us this week, may it be as though they encounter you. Father, we ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus, who is our King. Amen.